Hello students, welcome to today's class. The topic of today's lecture is Arts of Ancient Greece. There are certain objectives of today's lecture. To understand the numerous forms of art that were popular in ancient Greece is one of the very important objectives which we will be looking on today. Then to understand the evolution of ancient Greek pottery and the emergence of pottery as a significant export, to understand the development of art and architecture in ancient Greece is the third objective. The ancient Greece greatly impacted the culture of many countries, especially in the fields of art and architecture. Greek models primarily influenced the Roman Empire's art in the West, and in the East, Alexander the Great made the conquests which initiated the centuries of cultural exchange between Greek, Central Asia and Indian civilizations, resulting in the development of Greco-Buddhist art forms. Following the Renaissance in Europe, generations of European artists were influenced by the humanist aesthetic and high technical standards of Greek painting. The classical tradition originating from Greece dominated Western art till the 19th century. The four styles of ancient Greek art are known as geometric, archaic, classical and Hellenistic. The geometric art is commonly dated to approximately 1000 BCE, although little is known about Greek art from the preceding 2 centuries. Black figure vase painting from the 7th century BCE illustrates the slow development of the archaic style. In general, the start of the Persian Wars, which lasted from 480 to 448 BCE, is considered the line separating the archaic and the classical periods. Similarly, Alexander the Great's reign, which lasted from 336 to around 323 BCE, is considered the dividing line between the classical and the Hellenistic periods of art. Strong, rigid local traditions and the needs of local cults allow historians to trace the origins and development of Greek art. Dear students, in the next few paragraphs, we will go through many arts and crafts that were prevalent in ancient Greece. And first, we will be talking about the ceramic craft, which represented mostly the pottery. Most of the ancient Greek pottery was manufactured for utilitarian purpose rather than for exhibition, except for the Panathenaic amphorae that were awarded as trophies at ancient Greek sporting events. Amphorae craters, which are the bowls for mixing wine and water, then hydria, which are the water jugs, libation bowls, jugs and cups are most of the surviving specimens of Greek pottery. Additionally, painted funerary urns were discovered during excavations. Large quantities of miniatures were also made, mostly for use as temple offerings. During the Hellenistic period, a greater variety of pottery was produced, but most had little artistic value. After the geometric period, the Oriental period of vase painting replaced abstract geometric shapes with more rounded, realistic forms of Eastern themes such as the lotus, palm, lion and sphinx. Decoration is expanded in quantity and complexity, and historically even the smallest Greek cities manufactured pottery for their local area. The pottery varies greatly in style and quality. Some Asian islands, including Crete and the affluent Greek colonies of southern Italy and Sicily, produced ceramics of exceptional artistic beauty. However, Corinth and Athens emerged as the dominant commercial powers during the late Archaic and early Classical periods. Their pottery was exported throughout the Greek world, displacing indigenous artistic skills. Pots from Corinth and Athens were found as far away as Spain and Ukraine, and they were widespread in Italy in the 18th century, commonly known as the Etruscan vases. By the 5th century BCE, pottery had become a business and clay painting was no longer a significant art form. On the basis of aesthetic features, the Greek pottery may be divided into several periods such as proto-geometric, which lasted around 1050 BCE, then geometric around 900 BCE, late geometric or archaic around 750 BCE, black figure early 7th century BCE, and red figure around 530 BCE. Abstract motifs were used to embellish Greek ceramics during the proto-geometric and geometric periods. In subsequent eras, when aesthetics got transformed and potters' technical skills increased, embellishments took the form of human figures, typically depicting the gods or the heroes of Greek history and mythology. As they permitted the depiction of the horse, which the ancient Greeks held in great regard, battle and hunting scenes were also popular. In subsequent ages, erotical images also became prevalent. The use of fire restricted the range of colors that could be used on pots, with black, white, red and yellow being the most common. Earlier pots were left with their original light color and were decorated with kiln darkened slips. The fully developed black figure technique with added red and white elements and incising for details originated at Corinth in the early 7th century BCE. The technique was introduced to Attica roughly a century later and flourished there until the end of the 6th century BCE. The red figure style, which emerged around 530 BCE, inverted this pattern by painting black pots with red figures. The red figure vases gradually replaced the black figure vases, and larger vessels were occasionally etched in addition to being painted. Signatures are frequently found on the Greek pottery, occasionally by the potter or master potter and rarely by the painter. Nevertheless, the artistic personalities of countless painters make them readily identifiable. They are given names based on their subject preferences, such as the Achilles painter, the potter for whom they created the work, the late archaic Calliophredius painter, etc. Now, talking about the metal vessels. During the geometric and archaic periods, the production of enormous metal vessels with a vital stage in the development of bronze working techniques such as casting and repousse hammering. The votive vases were deposited in early sanctuaries in large numbers, hundreds in some cases. One such early sanctuary was Olympia. During the time of Orientalization, such tripods were frequently adorned with protoms in the form of griffins, sphinxes and other mythical creatures. Despite the fact that large metal vessels were of less importance during the archaic and the classical eras, their production, however, continued. In roughly 530 BCE, the Vix crater was a notable example. Now, coming to the terracotta figurines. Far before the Minoan civilization to the Hellenistic era and beyond, clay had been a popular material for creating votive figurines. During the 8th century BCE, Boeotia produced bell idols, female figurines with movable legs. The head, small in comparison to the rest of the body, is perched at the end of a long neck, while the body is very large and shaped like a bell. At the beginning of 8th century BC, tombs referred to as, in inverted commas, heroes, receive hundreds of miniature figurines with rudimentary figuration, often showing characters with uplifted arms, that is, gods in apotheosis. In later periods, the clay sculptures lose their religious significance and begin to depict characters from ordinary life. Tanagra figures dating from the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE demonstrate exquisite art and frequently have considerable surface paint marks. During the same time period, cities such as Alexandria, Smyrna and Tarsus produced an abundance of grotesque figurines depicting deformed individuals with bulging eyes and contorted bodies. Similarly, these figurines were also made of bronze. Now coming to metal figurines. Thousands of figurines made of metal, mostly bronze, portraying animals have been discovered at ancient Greek temples such as Olympia. They are often created using the lost wax process and may be regarded as the earliest form of Greek bronze sculpture. Horses and deer were the most prevalent motifs during the geometric period, but dogs, cattle and other animals were also depicted. Human figures occasionally appear. Throughout Greek antiquity, little metal votives continued to be manufactured. During the classical and Hellenistic periods, bronze statues that were increasingly intricate and intimately associated with the monumental sculptures became widespread. Now we will be talking about the monumental sculpture. In ancient Greece, those who engaged in the visual arts such as sculpting were devalued and thought of as nothing more than manual laborers. According to Plutarch, who has written the life of Pericles II, there is a saying in the text, and I quote, "We respect the object of art but loathe the maker of it," inverted commas close, was a widely held belief in antiquity. Art from ancient Greece is typically divided into 3 time periods, which include the Archaic, the Classic and the Hellenistic. Now coming to the materials which these Greek artists were using in producing these different and varied art forms. Ancient Greek sculptures were made of either stone or metals. Stone was the most commonly used material. Typically, marble or other high quality limestones were carved by hand using metal tools. Stone sculptures can be freestanding, completely carved in the round statues, or only partially carved reliefs affixed to a background plate, as in the architectural friezes or tomb stelae. Due to the reusable nature of metals, very few bronze statues have survived. These metal statues were created using the lost wax technique. Large sculptures were occasionally made of terracotta. However, only few specimens had survived. The most notable exception to this is a figure of Zeus carrying Ganymede, discovered in Olympia around 470 BCE. Now talking about the Archaic period, the massive stone sculpture of Egypt and Mesopotamia served as an inspiration for the Greeks for resumption of stone carving during the Archaic period. Freestanding figures like the Lady of Osier and torso of Hera have the sturdiness and frontal attitude of Eastern models, but their forms are more dynamic than those of Egyptian sculptures. Both male and female figures began to sport the so-called archaic smile after around 575 BCE. This look, which doesn't specifically fit the person or circumstance shown, may have been used to give the figures a recognizable human trait. The standing naked adolescent, which is referred to as choros, the standing draped girl, that is chore, and the seated woman were the 3 main forms of figures. All highlight and oversimplify the fundamental aspects of the human form, demonstrating an ever-increasing understanding of the human anatomy. The human form was consequently deemed to be the most significant subject for the artistic endeavor by the ancient Greeks. There was no separation between the holy and the secular in art because they saw their gods as taking on human form. The human body was both secular and sacred. For example, Apollo, Heracles, or the Olympic boxing champions could all be masculine nude. The standing male nude, the Kouros, was the most significant sculpture form throughout the Archaic period. Since Greek society did not authorize the public display of female nudity until the 4th century BCE, the court or the standing clothed female figure is regarded as having less significance in the development of these sculptures. The Greeks did not manufacture pottery or sculpture only to display them for their aesthetic value. The statues were commissioned either by aristocratic people or by the state to serve as public memorials, as tributes to temples, oracles, and sanctuaries, as is frequently indicated by inscriptions on the statues, or they were used as the burial markers. In many cases, the inscriptions on the statues describe the purpose of the statue. Not all statues from the Archaic era were meant to portray particular people. They represented ideals such as beauty, piety, honor, and sacrifice. Even when they were positioned on the graves of elderly people, these were always images of young males ranging in age from adolescence to early manhood. Each koroi has a similar aesthetic. Size variations rather than artistic advances were used to convey changes in the social status of the person who commissioned a particular monument. Now, coming to the second time period, which is described as the classical period. Greek statues underwent an unprecedented change during the classical era, which is typically correlated with the establishment of democracy and the abolition of the koroi-related aristocratic culture. The form and purpose of sculptures changed during the classical period. Greek sculptors improved their technical ability to render the human body in various positions and poses to make them more naturalistic. From about 500 BCE onwards, statues began to depict real people, and historians believe that the statues of Aristogiton and Harmodius in Athens, which were erected to commemorate the end of an earlier Greek tyranny, may be the first public statues of actual people. During this period, statues and sculptures were used in various contexts. The ornate friezes on the great temples of the classical era, such as the Parthenon in Athens and the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, required relief sculpture. Additionally, round sculpture was required for the triangular fields of the pediments. The difficult aesthetic and technical challenges stimulated much in the way of sculpture innovation. The most famous of these pieces, like the Parthenon marbles, sadly only remain in fragments, partly housed at the British Museum. During this time, funeral sculptures evolved from the rigid and impersonal kouros of the Archaic period to the highly personalized family groups of the classical period. These monuments are widely found in the suburbs of Athens, which were previously ancient cemeteries on the city's outskirts. They progressively portrayed and real people, usually portraying the deceased taking honorable leave from the family. Some of them depicted ideal situations, such as the grieving mother and the responsible son. They are some of the most private and moving artifacts from the time of the ancient Greeks. Now we will be talking about the Hellenistic period, which is the third period in the development of the sculptural art in ancient Greece. The Hellenistic era began in the 4th century BCE, replacing the classical period. Following Alexander's conquests, Greek civilization reached as far as Gandhara region, as evidenced by the excavations at Ai Khanum in eastern Afghanistan and Taxila in Pakistan. The aesthetic expression of Greco-Buddhist art in South Asia was a synthesis of Greek art and the Buddhist aesthetics. Thus, Greek art became increasingly diverse and influenced by the cultures of those drawn into its orbit. According to some art historians, its quality and originality also declined. However, artists and art enthusiasts of the time would not have agreed with this assessment. In fact, several sculptures previously believed to be classical masterpieces were discovered to be of the Hellenistic origin. The technical skill of the Hellenistic sculptors is also evident in works such as the Winged Victory of Samothrace and the Pergamon altar. In Alexandria, Antioch, Pergamum and other cities, new centers of Greek culture emerged, particularly in the field of sculpture. By the 2nd century, Rome expanded its authority and assimilated a significant portion of the Greek legacy and a growing proportion of its goods. Sculpture became increasingly realistic during this period. Common people, women, children, animals and domestic scenes became acceptable subjects for sculpture, which was commissioned by wealthy families for the adornment of their homes and even gardens. Realistic portraits of men and women of all ages were created when sculptors no longer felt compelled to depict individuals as ideals of beauty or the physical perfection. Concurrently, the emerging Hellenistic cities in Egypt, Syria and Anatolia demanded statues of Greek gods and heroes for their temples and even public spaces. Standardization and a general decline in quality led to the formation of the sculpture industry in the same way just as that of ceramics did. It was because of these various factors more statues from the Hellenistic period have been preserved than those from the classical period. Now coming to the another aspect of art and architecture which was prevalent in ancient Greece, now we will be looking at the different architectural forms. Architecture was extant in Greece from the end of the Mycenaean period until the 7th century when urban life and prosperity emerged, which led to the erection of the public architecture. Since most Greek buildings during the archaic and early classical periods were made of wood or mud brick, only a few ground plans have thus survived. There are no written sources regarding early architecture of building descriptions. The majority of our knowledge of Greek architecture is thus derived from the few surviving classical, Hellenistic and Roman structures as well as from late textual sources such as Vitruvius of the 1st century CE. This indicates a strong preference for temples, the only structures that have survived in significant numbers. The basic layout of Greek public buildings is well known from surviving examples such as the Parthenon and even more so from the Roman structures partially based on the Greek model like the Pantheon. The structure was typically a cube or a rectangle made from massive blocks of the abundant limestone in Greece that had been cut and dressed. Marble was an expensive building material in ancient Greece due to the limited availability of high quality marble from Mount Pentelos in Attica and at a few islands such as Paros, and the difficulty of transporting large pieces thereof. Except for the most important buildings of the classical period, such as the Parthenon It was predominantly used for sculpture embellishment rather than structural purposes. Doric and Ionic were two primary styles of Greek architecture. These titles were used by the Greeks themselves and indicated their conviction that the styles were descended from the Dorian and Ionian Greeks of the Dark Ages. Nevertheless, this is highly dubious. The Doric style originated on the Greek mainland and moved to the Greek colonies in Italy. The Ionic style was utilized in the towns of Ionia, which is now the west coast of Turkey, and certain Asian islands. The Doric style was more official and austere, whereas the Ionic style was more casual and ornamental. The Corinthian style was a later version of the Ionic style. The three orders of column capitals best represent these styles. However, there are significant design and decorative distinctions between these orders. Now I will be talking about the coin design. The use of coins dates back to Lydia in the 7th century BCE, but the Greeks were the first to use them widely. The Greeks set the canon of coin design, which has been followed ever since. Coin design today still recognizably follows patterns descended from ancient Greece. Designers from Greece pioneered the practice of depicting a head and shoulders portrait on the obverse of coins. At one point, this was a representational emblem of the city's patron god or goddess, such as Athena for Athens, Apollo for Corinth, Demeter for Thebes, etc. In later years, the heads of Greek mythological heroes like Heracles were used on coins that were issued by Alexander the Great. The first human likenesses to appear on coins were those of Persian satraps in Asia Minor. In the 4th century BCE, Greek cities in Italy such as Syracuse and Alexander the Great's Hellenistic successors in Egypt, Syria and elsewhere began to put the heads of real people on the coins. On the reverse of their coins, the Greek cities often put a symbol of the city, for example, an owl for Athens, a dolphin for Syracuse, and so on. Inscriptions on coins first appeared in Greek times, and all of these traditions were later carried on by the Romans. Now coming to the painting traditions. Many interconnected painting traditions are notably found in ancient Greece. Writers like Pliny and Pausanias say that the most admired art was made on oak panels and was called a panel painting. The artists used wax painting and tempera, and most of these paintings showed people like portraits and still lifes having descriptions of a number of their compositions. Pausanias says that these kinds of shows were held in Athens and Delphi. From literary sources, we know the names of several well-known painters, most of whom lived during the classical and Hellenistic periods. Unfortunately, none of the great Greek panel paintings or copies that existed and taught us most of what we know about Greek sculpture had survived. This is because the materials used were easily destroyed and there were a lot of changes at the end of antiquity. The most important Greek examples that have survived are the Pitsa panels from around 530 BCE, even though they aren't perfect. Wall painting in Greece has been around since the Minoan and Mycenaean Bronze Ages, when sites like Knossos, Tyrannus and Mycenae were built. It is not clear what these paintings have to do with later Greek wall murals. Pausanias talks a lot about wall paintings, and it looks like many were made during the classical and Hellenistic periods. Few architectural pieces have been preserved. The grave of Philip, for example, and the tomb of Persephone at Vergina Macedonia are the two most famous examples. The painting tradition also improved the visual qualities of the architecture. Since the Archaic era, specific areas of the superstructure of Greek temples were frequently painted. Such architectural polychromy could take the shape of intricate patterns often found on terracotta architectural elements, as seen on the Parthenon, or of vibrant colors applied directly to the stone. The majority of Greek statues were painted in vivid and bold colors. Although the skin was typically kept in its natural stone color, and just portions of sculptures were painted to represent clothing, hair, and other features. However, painting an entire statue sometimes was also possible. Greek sculpture that has been painted possesses qualities of a particular art form and should not just be considered as an improvement of its sculpted form. So, with this, we have come to the end of this lecture. I hope you have enjoyed and understood its contents. Thank you so much.